Right? The belief that you are too broken, that you are too stacked, that you stacked up too many failures, that you've made too many choices that you regret, you've drifted too far from God. And if you're honest, part of you believes that God's grace could never extend to you. Friends, I want to tell you that is a lie from the pit of hell itself. And some of us then, meanwhile, believe, if we're honest, we look at others and we think, there's no way back for them. But friends, we have seen again that also is a lie from the pit of hell, because Saul, on the road to Damascus, he encountered Jesus. Jesus opened his eyes, and he was absolutely and wholeheartedly transformed. That is the power of grace on the move. That's the reach of his mercy. And if he can do it with Saul, don't believe he can't do it with you. And don't you dare believe that he can't do it with the person you have written off in your life.
I want to introduce you to an incredible redemption story today from author Bob Goff. So while he was in Uganda, Bob heard about a boy named Charlie who had survived an attack by a witch doctor who used children's body parts in rituals, just the cruelest of things. Well, Bob, who was serving as Uganda's consul to the United States at the time, he used his legal expertise to prosecute Kabi, the witch doctor who was responsible for the attack. Well, Kabi was convicted of his crimes, setting a precedent for justice in Uganda by ensuring that such acts would be held accountable. With assistance from Cedars-Sinai, Charlie received free medical care and surgery for his injuries, an event that Goff helped facilitate himself. Well, Bob began visiting Kabi in the prison. Think about this. This is a guy that saw the worst. He saw this little boy who was mutilated by this witch doctor who had probably done this time after time. And so he began visiting Kabi in prison because he knew that God wanted him to forgive him. He, and even in his book, he even talks about how hard that was to forgive this man who did such cruel and terrible things to children. Well, this witch doctor, through these visitations, eventually converted to Christianity himself and found forgiveness. And in fact, one of the stories I love about this is Bob talks about a time where Kabi was so excited about his Christian faith that he wanted to baptize other people in this really desolate prison in Uganda. And so he's going around and he wanted Bob to come and film part of it and see it. And when he showed him, he was taking just water from anywhere he can get water, and he's pouring on them. He's saying all the wrong things, trying to baptize them. And Bob's saying, no, that's not how you do it. But then he thought, you know what? He's excited. He's trying to get people born again for Jesus. So Kabi's transformation inspired Bob to start a school program with Restore International, which was teaching former witch doctors to read and write and encouraging them to end their violent practices. So what you're going to learn, I love this story because it's an incredible story of redemption. And what you're going to learn from this series that we're going through, we're starting today, is that nobody is too far or too gone or done too much wrong to be reached and changed by the saving grace of Jesus Christ. So we're going to learn the incredible story of Saul, who would later be called Paul. Jacob introduced this journey from a true bad guy to the early Christians. He was persecuting, having Christians killed, converted to one of the greatest heroes of the Christian faith that we've ever known. In fact, he wrote most of our New Testament that we have today. Jacob looked at Saul's journey in a similar way to taking a family vacation journey. And I love the example of the analogy he used here because most of us have taken vacations either as children, taken on them, or we've taken our kids. And it's not always easy. In fact, it usually isn't just carefree and easygoing. And what I think of, because I'm a movie guy and I like comedies, I think of the movie Vacation, the original Vacation with Chevy Chase, my all-time favorite actor. I think it's from 1980. And here is Chevy is taking his family. The desired place in America at this time is Wally World in LA or California. He's in Chicago, so it was clear across the country, but he had this dream, kind of like the Disney World at the time. He had his dream of taking his family on this trip to Wally World, and this was cross country. They were going to make stops along the way. So let's get started in our metallic P family truckster, as you'll see the picture from Vacation, and let's take a journey, a trip to follow the steps of Saul across the country. But instead of the desired destination of Wally World that we see in Vacation, this is an encounter with Jesus Christ that Saul is getting to. So in the beginning of Acts, and we're just going to briefly go through this, Jacob talked about this on Sunday. The beginning of Acts, we see Jesus resurrected and then ascended into heaven after being on earth for a month with all of his followers. And so at this time, the church explodes because everybody sees the resurrected Jesus, and they are so excited for what Jesus is doing. And Peter, remember, Peter gives that first message, and over 3,000 new followers of Jesus start following what was called the Way, the followers of Jesus. And these were super Christians. These were people that meeting every single day. They were praising God. They were eating together. They were giving to each other whenever somebody had needs. They were bold in the life of Jesus, and this was growing. And one of those growing was Stephen, who was preaching bold sermons. And one particular time, he was preaching a very bold sermon. Much of it is listed in the book of Acts. But the problem is he's calling out many of the people who were sinning against God. Many of them were the religious leaders, the Pharisees, many who Jesus called out himself, or Jewish people who didn't recognize Jesus as the Messiah. But because of that, he was then stoned to death. And this is where we meet Saul. So Acts chapter 8, verse 1. This way, by the way, Acts is written by Luke, the Luke from the Gospels, who also had talked to a lot of eyewitnesses around Jesus. So he's getting eyewitness accounts of what actually happened at this time. So Saul approved of their killing him. So we know right away that when Stephen was killed, Saul was approved, and we're going to find out that he was even helped instigate it. They helped put their coats, Jacob explained in his message, right, that they would take off their coats to get better arm strength. It's like, my goodness, they did whatever it took to destroy somebody. Well, it says, on that day, a great persecution broke out against the church in Jerusalem, and all except the apostles were scattered throughout Judea and Samaria. Godly men buried Stephen and mourned deeply for him, but Saul began to destroy the church. I don't know about you, but I can't think of a worse. I wonder if Saul, now Paul, would ever look back and think, I can't believe this is who I was, destroying the Christian church. He was going from house to house. He dragged off both men and women to put them in prison just for following Jesus. But on one hand, I think if we look at Saul's life, how hard can we be on him? Because if we understand we know Saul was Jewish. He was also a highly educated Roman citizen as well, but he was a Pharisee, a very smart man who was zealous for God. He loved God so much, and he thought he was actually doing what God wanted. He thought Jesus was a heretic because, much like so many of the Pharisees, they didn't believe Jesus was the Messiah. So if they didn't believe he was the Messiah that was prophesied before, well, he was against God. So he thought he was doing God's right thing. But then we see him obviously sinning against God by how he went about what he thought was needed. So we see in chapter 9, verse 1, meanwhile, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. So even if he thought he was doing the right thing, breathing out murderous threats, he would have known was a sin against the Ten Commandments that he was so zealous about. So he went up to the high priest, and he asked him for letters to the synagogue in Damascus, so that if he found anyone there who belonged to the Way, here again, the followers of Jesus, whether men or women, that he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. And one thing that Jacob pointed out, it didn't even dawn on me. In fact, I don't even know if I knew this, that it was 150 miles from Jerusalem to Damascus. And they didn't have their scooter. They didn't have their bike. They didn't have their cars. That would have been walking. All that way he was going to gather people who were Christians to arrest them. So if we go back to our vacation, our journey that we're going on, that we're going to use as similarity to, is kind of what Saul's doing right now. Things are going great, right? He's got permission from the religious leaders to arrest these people that he thought were doing wrong. He's getting everything he wants. So thinking of the movie, this is where Chevy Chase, or the actor's name Clark Griswold in the movie, he's flying down the highway in his family truckster, making great time, and all of a sudden he looks over and he sees Christy Brinkley, the model, flirting with him in the Ferrari. So everything's going great, right? You see this picture, like life is good for Saul. But then we see a problem for Saul. As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. I mean, I was trying to picture myself in these scenes. Imagine you're walking along, you're dead set, everything's going right on what you want to do. You have a vision, you have a goal, and all of a sudden a blinding light comes out that everybody just drops to the ground. He fell to the ground, and he heard a voice say to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" I mean, picture what that would have been like to hear this voice, and you know this is supernatural. So now Saul is completely taken off guard, and he has to change his direction, much like Clark Griswold did when they had to make a stop along their way to this great family vacation to Wally World to see his cousin Eddie, who hasn't had a job in 7 years because he's holding out for management. And then he has to take his Aunt Edna to the rest of the way, who complains about everything. There is a blip in the road. Now it's not going near as what he had planned or expected. So now Saul was taken by his friends to Damascus, as Jesus commanded him to do when he spoke to him. He was blind. He didn't eat or drink for the 3-day journey. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't go much more than a meal at all without eating. To take that long, being blind, not eating, and drinking, just to me would be torture. So I'm going to ask Daniel, I'm going to bring him into the conversation. Daniel, do you remember a few years ago, I'm pretty sure this was the last time I helped Cheryl. When Cheryl was leading the youth, I used to always stay for the 30-hour famine that she did with the youth group. And I always stayed during that famine and didn't eat to be along with them. But it's hard because that's a long time without eating. But do you remember, Daniel, the last time that we did this on a Friday night about 9:30, 10 o'clock, what we did?
I do remember sneaking in some McDonald's.
Yes, we did. And I'm going to throw him under the bus. Jacob was in that way as well. He was not even the youth leader. In fact, he wasn't on staff at all at the time. He was a volunteer. So I think it dawned on me, and even though, and yes, this is probably wrong that we snuck it in, but about 9:30 or 10 o'clock, we have some quiet time where the kids were doing their thing with Cheryl, and I just thought, I am starving. And I thought, you know what? I'm a volunteer. I don't have to. Cheryl never said I had to fast with them. So I went to get McDonald's and I took an order. It's like I'm like Adam or I'm like Eve in the Garden of Eden, tempting the Daniel and Jacob. Hey, do you want McDonald's? I'm going to go get some. And so yes, we brought that back, and I think we kept that secret hidden for a little while. But anyhow, we know what it's like to be in hunger, at least for a little while. In verse 10, in Damascus, there was a disciple named Ananias. Well, the Lord called to him in a vision, Ananias. Well, all of a sudden, he's obedient. Yes, Lord, he answered. Here again, can you imagine this disciple of God hearing this audible voice? Can you imagine if right now or tonight you hear an audible voice say out, Kyle, hey, Kyle. You're like, yes, Lord, you're talking to me. What do you want? Well, the Lord told him, go to the house of Judas on Straight Street. Ask for a man from Tarsus named Saul, for he is praying. And in a vision, he has seen a man named Ananias come to place his hands on him to restore his sight. Now, you may say, that's clear and easy instructions. God is telling Ananias exactly what to do. How hard can this be? This is great, because so many times we're trying to discern, what does God want me to do next? God's told Ananias what he wants to do. But knowing Ananias, he had to be like, wait, what? It's like, you know who this man is, right? And so when I try to picture this, because remember, Saul was arresting Christians, putting them in jail, or even approving their killing. And God is calling Ananias to voluntarily go to this man. So think of this. You know, we are, I think we're in our age, most of us remember the pictures, the movies of what it was like during World War II. Think about what it would be like for a Jewish person who is in hiding from the Nazis who were trying to kill off the Jews during World War II. And all of a sudden, God calls you and says, hey, Kyle, I want you to go witness. I need you to go to this Nazi German, and knock on his door, and I want you to witness about Jesus to him. And you're like, there's got to be another way. Maybe I could give him a call. Maybe I could send him a telegram. Do you understand what he has done? So going back to Acts 9, verse 17. Well, then Ananias went to the house and entered it. So he's doing what God asked him. I love he was still obedient, even though it was difficult. So he placed his hands on Saul. And he said, Brother Saul, the Lord Jesus, who appeared to you on the road as you were coming here, he sent me so that you may see again and be filled with the Holy Spirit. Here again, I wonder, and someday get to heaven, I'd love to ask Ananias, were you afraid when you took your hands off Saul and he regained his sight? Because he regained his sight and he immediately became baptized and completely changed his life. Like, I wonder if he was afraid, like, all of a sudden, is he going to come after me? Because that's all they knew about Saul. I love the question Jacob asked on this past Sunday. He said, who is your 2025 Saul? Meaning, who do you know today? Maybe it's somebody personally you know. Maybe it's somebody in your family, a coworker, somebody that you just think, who would be today's Saul? You just think there's no way God could transform their life. So I've got an answer, but first I want to hear from Daniel. If you have a thought of who would be your 2025 Saul.
Yeah, I think of the militant mindset behind Paul at the time of seeing Christians as being opposed to the faith of the Jewish people, like they were still waiting for the Messiah, and they're claiming that the Messiah has already come. So I think of the persecution that is happening in Africa for Christians, because you have religious extremists who believe that what we're doing is threatening them.
Yeah, I mean, very similar to what we see here. And I think it could be a wide variety. I know years ago, Saddam Hussein would have been one of those people that we think killed all these people. I mean, you can look at Putin today. You can look at the leader of North Korea, these dictators who don't care about other people. And you just think there's no way that they could turn their lives to Christ and start being such a witness, being such a disciple of Jesus Christ. But we see that can happen to anybody. So we have to honestly ask ourselves, who have you been writing off? Who have I been writing off that we didn't think God could do that with? And Pastor Jacob said that we as Christians need to stop seeing people where they are, but instead we need to see them how God sees them, and he loves them all. So one last question for Daniel, as I like to do each week. What did you feel was the most impactful part of Jacob's message this week in your life?
Yeah, I think of the challenge that Jacob gave, and Kyle also gave in the previous messages of if all your prayers were answered tomorrow, how many of your enemies would be saved towards God?
I mean, that's such a challenging point. In fact, I've changed my daily prayer because of that. I started praying individually for people I know in my life, friends and family that aren't saved, so that I'm praying for them each. But I need to do that the same with enemies, people that I don't, or I think are far from God, or people that I think have no chance to be converted. I need to be praying for them because God can change anybody's life. You see, as a Notre Dame super fan, I love the line from the great movie Rudy when the coach Dan Devine was giving the pregame inspirational speech that ended like this. He said, no one, I mean no one, comes into our house and pushes us around. I say that because I think of the main point we said at the beginning of this message. Think of the confidence and the swagger when hearing our main point today. Nobody, I mean nobody, is too far gone or has done too much wrong to be reached and changed by the saving grace of Jesus. Have a great week.
Like and subscribe.